Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Breath Science podcast with me, Martin McPhillamy. In this episode, we are going to talk about breath holding, particularly whether we should be using nasal breathing or mouth breathing following a breath hold. Now, Jay Stewart dropped me this message on my Instagram at Performance Through Health, and it was a question that I just didn't really want to respond one-to-one. I thought it would be a nice question to share amongst my audience, and that was, he had stated that he'd seen people doing breath holds whilst in the water, using nasal breathing, using mouth breathing to recover, and that sometimes he will try and do nasal breathing following his breath hold, and he sees people doing mouth breathing following his breath hold. And I thought I would just kind of clear the air a little bit of my insight to what I believe is happening. But before we go there, let's just have a discussion about what we might use breath holds for. Now, breath holds have been used in traditional breath work for thousands of years. For example, the Buddhists use, in Tumo, they would use a breath hold retention to use it as a form of meditation and stillness. And then we have the kumbhakas in traditional pranayamas. And that's not to say they haven't been used more recently. So, for example, in the oxygen advantage, they are used for means of hypercapnic training, so getting used to higher levels of air hunger in the body. And also, traditionally, freedivers might even use breath holds to get their ability to tolerate low oxygen levels so that they are less likely to pass out at a higher level of low oxygen. So, a bit of a paradoxical word there. So there's a different array of reasons of why we might use breath holds. And that might be to teach relaxation. It might be to teach air hunger tolerance. It might be low O2 tolerance. It might just be for meditative purposes. However, we can do breath holds on an inhale. We can do them on a neutral lung, or we can do them on a complete exhale. And that's going to change the intensity of how challenging the breath hold is. And also, even specifically, what you might be wanting to achieve in the goal. For example, a longer form breath hold on an inhale might be more meditative compared to a exhale breath hold, which is going to be more stimulating and more sympathetic. However, what we do following a breath hold really depends on a few different things. It depends on, number one, the intensity of the breath hold. Because if we think about if we are holding our breath for a long time, let's say you're doing a maximum breath hold or you're doing it under a high level of air hunger, trying to recover through your nose is going to be very challenging only. And in fact, it might even be detrimental for your ability to recover. Say, for example, if you come out of a free dive and you try to then breathe through the nose following a maximum breath hold, you want to get that oxygen back in as fast as possible. And therefore, taking deeper breaths in through the mouth is going to aid and assist in doing that. It's also going to depend on the intensity of either the work you're doing or the breath hold itself. Now, if you are exercising when you do this sort of breath holds, for example, you can have walking apneas versus sprinting. If you are sprinting with a breath hold, you are again more likely to have hypoxia, low oxygen, but going to be stimulating your air hunger very high. So then it depends on whether we use our mouth or nose, depends on the intensity of the exercise. Generally, I say the higher the intensity of the exercise or higher the intensity of air hunger, the more likely we're going to use mouth breathing to recover, at least to begin with. We'll talk about that in a moment. The third thing we have to consider is the specific goal itself. To adapt to things like air hunger or CO2 tolerance, some people call, or to actually generally perform and get your maximum results in, say, a race or competition. And I did a podcast with Jason Donaldson a little while back. I'll link that in my YouTube and in the show notes. And he talks about the concept of the difference between adaptation and difference between performance. Because if we're using breath holds as a means to adapt to things like air hunger, then in the recovery session or recovery parts of that, then we're really going to want to try and also maybe stimulate a bit more air hunger and try and maybe breathe through the nose as a recovery. Because that is a part of the specific training role itself. However, what about if you have someone doing repeated sprints and they're doing a breath hold and repeated sprints, say for example on an exhale? Now, the goal itself is to stimulate low oxygen with the breath hold, but also you want to be able to do the maximum amount of work. So you want to recover faster. And you might actually recover faster by taking a few mouth breaths to begin with, following your breath hold and then switching back to nasal breathing, going through what you might call a reverse gearing system. We'll leave the gearing system for another podcast. Then we have to kind of consider the final thing of whether we're trying to perform and set a particular target or a goal, or say win a race. Now, air hunger is a powerful instinctual stimulus, meaning that it's an interoceptive feeling, a feeling state that's created from changes in biochemistry. Now, the reason why it's so powerful, because pH in the body is critically important to survival and for conscious awareness. So, it's evolved to create a very high negative feeling and a very high level of arousal. So if we go into a race, for example, we go into a race and we want to win, and we're either using our nasal or mouth breathing, we start to feel air hunger, then it's going to be better off to bring down the level of air hunger so that we can keep moving forward at the rate we are going, because air hunger will challenge your ability to keep moving forward and progress at the same rate, because it creates negative feelings. The negative feelings are to change your behavior, i.e. slow down or breathe faster. So again, if we're using like these sort of things in a performance aspect and breath holds, we might want to recover through mouth breathing. The final thing is the environment, because if we are in the water, number one, if you're ever doing breath hold work in the water, you never want to do this alone. Number two, you never want to be doing hyperventilation style breath work, such as Wim Hof breathing and a breath hold in the water, because of risk of shallow water blackout. But number three, we have to consider that we have more control from our lips and our mouth when we're doing breathing and breath holds in the water. Say, for example, we're doing some freediving training or underwater stress tolerance training. When we pop our heads up, that if we were to take a big deep breath in through our nose and we have water at the edge of our nostrils, we're going to just inhale that, and that's going to cause us to choke. So therefore, using your mouth, at least to begin with, until you can either wipe your face or your breath has become gentle again, that's going to be a more safe and easier way to do it. So it's very goal dependent, it's very environmental dependent, and it's very intensity independent on whether we're going to recover through the mouth or the nose. Generally, if our goal is to try and get back to a state of being calm and relaxed, then it might be a few mouth breaths following exhale and trying to switch back to nasal breathing and calming the breath down as soon as possible. There are also a couple of people and individuals who probably shouldn't do breath hold training, and this should be really at the discretion of your medical practitioner, but people with high blood pressure, history of heart attacks and strokes, pregnant individuals, and maybe even people with things like panic disorder as well. So if you have any serious health concerns and you're thinking about integrating breath hold training into your practice, please do ensure that you consult with your medical practitioner before you start to do so. You might want to learn how to use breath holds more deeply on the Breath Science certification. You can visit that on www.breathscience.com.au. I will pop a link in the show notes, and we dive further into air hunger tolerance training, biochemistry of breathing, breath holding, and how to use the science of breathing across all different domains of health, well-being, and performance. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you have any questions, comments, leave them below. I'd love to hear from you. Again, I'll be back in a couple of weeks' time.